always a funny thing recording a podcast here because you're just already talking before it, but then you hit record, so people kind of just join in at that point in the conversation. But it's good to see you guys.
Good to be seen.
Yeah, Fletch, you were telling a story and you interrupted yourself because you wanted to save it for the pod. So why don't you share that story? It sounded good.
Well, there's a couple different stories. Which one do you want me to tell?
Whichever one your heart desires.
Well, I don't really know how to best put this, but I've kind of splurged today, and I can't be on this podcast for too long because I've signed up for my first facial, um,
Wow.
and
Fletch, are you sure you want to publicly say that?
it already has been said. So the cat is out of the bag. I think it's really important for men to take care of their skin. So I was thinking about, I'm like, do I really want to do this and subject myself to this sort of treatment? And I'm doing it. So I hope you can see this face and remember it.
I've kind of always wondered, what does a facial really entail? Like, is it a massage as well, or is it just kind of the moisture?
I had a facial on my honeymoon, and yeah, I'd love to. It was quite an episode. The facial I got though was kind of a little too mysterious for my taste. It was like, okay, we're gonna blow this specialized air on your face to help exfoliate whatever. It was like I like opened my eye quickly, and all it was like a little like a poof, poof, like one of those like air pushers. It was weird. It was weird.
Oh, you're gonna say it's one of those things that you use to get the dust off of like computer keyboards. But no, HD, I think I hold a lot of tension in my jaw and right here in my cheeks. So I'm hoping, some magic hands can help me release a little bit of that tension. So it's more for the musculature element of the facial. Hopefully
See,
they
this is
don't.
the difference. The difference between McKenzie and Fletch is McKenzie opens his eyes and is like, "Is that a computer cleaner?" And Fletch opens his eyes and is, "Yes, yes, it's perfect." It's perfect.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking
Always
about
falling
where
into
I
the
hold tension in my face. That's for sure.
I knew you looked brighter after the honeymoon, Mackenzie. I thought it was just because it was, the honeymoon phase of the.
No, it's because I got out in the sun for the first time in a year. That was probably what did it.
It's exceptional. Well, dudes, it's good to see you. It's good to jump back into. I believe this could be another episode of Dudes with Feelings, and I think we have something really special to talk about today because we're not staying on the surface, right? We're going a little bit deeper and talking about what it means to cultivate and have and maintain deep relationships. So if any of you guys want to just kick this off and really talk about, um, what is a deep relationship and how have they shown up in your lives?
Yeah, you know what's funny? I feel like about relationships is we may see that we see this title, maybe it's healthy relationships, and we all want to think that our relationships are healthy. I know I do. I want to think I have good quality relationships. And the reason I may be upset or experiencing things like depression, anxiety, I certainly never want to point to my relationships. But I feel like study after study tells us that there's nothing that affects us like relationships. The link between our mental, emotional, spiritual health and our relationships is the strongest link. And so it feels like, I mean, I'm excited for this conversation because it feels like there's nothing more important when it comes to being an integrated man, when it comes to being just a healthy human, than the quality of our relationships. And I mean, I feel like it's easy too to talk about it, considering I've known you guys for so long, and we can think about like what has developed into our relationship. How have we developed these relationships? What have we learned? Where have we failed? Um, yeah, just a couple of things coming up for me. Mackenzie, I know you do a lot of work with men and in this men's group work. What do you hear around this idea of healthy relationships, and why might that be so hard for men to really press into?
I think for men, there's a real friendship deficit across the board, and the older you get, the worse it gets. Um, especially married men who have children, they are way less likely to make new male friends than one who is still single out there and being social. Um, I think especially it hits men hard, especially after college, going from living with a bunch of people to all of a sudden being all on your own. And most men can't even identify a single close friend or someone who they consider a friend to be vulnerable with. And I think that's a real problem in today's current construction of masculinity is we have a friendship deficit because of it.
Yeah, and I feel like as you're talking, Mackenzie, I'm like going back and looking at the way in which my life is unfolded and seeing how certain relationships have um, kind of withered away. And some of those on purpose, some of them have just been a divergent of paths, kind of like what we were talking about in the other episode about when you go to weddings, it's like a goodbye, right? Um, but I feel like as you know you're developing, right, you start to figure out that wait a second, maybe that person who you thought was you were super close with, it was all stuff that was just on the surface. It was just common interests. So it starts to you start to kind of figure out, or you start to ask yourself really, who do I want to become, and who is really important in my life, and who do I want to keep having those friendships with.
Yeah, I think there's a serious misinterpretation of what it means to have friendships as a man. I think the desire, first off, isn't there. I think the desire for men is to kind of have almost that hero like mentality, which is, any issues, any problems I'm having, I need to internalize that and make that my problem rather than share it with other people. And then on the opposite side, I need to be constantly giving and helping other people too, because that's my value. When really, like, we shouldn't be heroes, especially we shouldn't be heroes in our own journey because it's impossible to maintain. Like Spider-Man is not an example of a healthy guy. And I think that's something that like a lot of men need to understand is that hero's journey is not a journey you should try to embark on because it leads to loneliness.
Those are fighting words, Cubs.
Let's
I'm
go.
sure. I'm sure we got some Spider-Man fans on this pod. Yeah, and maybe just to kind of put this in a practical sense, and if you're listening to this, just thinking about who are those close guy friends in your life. Because the hard part about deep relationships is we don't know what deep looks like until we go deep, right? Like I can feel really close to someone, but if I've never been really, really close with someone, I don't know what that feels like. And I think sometimes I've noticed, and maybe myself as well, just like can be a little bit liberal with this idea of friendship and how do I define that? And I want to feel it's kind of the difference between am I seeking um, the quantity of friends, like more friends, or am I really seeking quality and going deep with a little or um, wide with a few? And I think that becomes the key distinction, and I've had to ask myself that a lot, and I think everyone kind of tracks differently. I'm curious for you guys, like how does that land? The idea of going deeper with few, or having more friends, maybe just a little bit less depth. Like, do you feel like there's a right or wrong there? Is there what have you guys experienced?
I think my well, a couple things are coming up for me right now because I think about where does a deep relationship come from and how do you form those. And when I was pondering this question before the podcast, I kept coming back to the word sharing. So whether it be sharing an experience through a trip, through going outside and doing something like any sort of physical exercise, some sort of sharing an experience with another guy, with a group of people, that ends up becoming something that forms a connecting point, and then you have a memory dividend together. Also, sharing your personal history with that person, I think, then allows you um, to kind of take off the veil and take off the mask that we like to wear around, and show that person who you really are and where you come from. So sharing was something that was coming up for me, and thinking about deep relationships and how they form. um, HD, to
Fletcher,
kind of answer your question though, I'm still dancing between those two, because I think it feels good to be liked by a lot of people and have a lot of friends, quote unquote, because we have social medias that say, oh, like friends, a lot of friends. But I think that kind of forms this emptiness inside, and you don't get that deep, warm, satisfactory love that I think we as humans really, really do crave. So I'm kind of learning that deep for me with a few is a lot more um, gratifying and fulfilling.
I think men particularly get really good at like creating surface level friendships. We can meet someone on a golf course or out, doing whatever it is you like to do as a hobby, and make an interest level friend or a surface level friend very quickly, and just have that friendship related around the convenience of that hobby. So like, a lot of guys have a lot of friends who they only hang out with if they're going to watch, a football game, or if they're going to go to a bar, or they're going to go do a hobby or an activity. But when it comes time to actually have substance in that conversation, it remains very surface level. And so you're not getting anything from that relationship that's actually going to fill you or benefit you in the long haul. There's nothing, I guess there's no health benefits that can come from that. Where the health benefits can really come is in feeling like you can actually open up to these friends and share and embrace weaknesses. And I think that's the key here, because a lot of friends, a lot of guy friends to each other just kind of like prosecute each other, or like make fun of each other, or rag each other. And that's all fun. But if there's no effort to make weakness a center point of conversation, you're not actually getting any benefit from that friendship. So, like for an example, uh, or as an example, if you're going through a breakup and your friend asks you like, "Hey, how's that breakup going?" and you're kind of just being passive of it, you're not actually getting the benefits of talking through that breakup with somebody. And I think that's the problem that a lot of men struggle with, is because they're scared to make that leap or to ask that question.
yeah, and bringing in, I think the idea of partnership here. I know you mentioned the breakup. I think what ends up happening too a lot of times, right, is if I don't have close guy friends or just close friends in general that I can talk to about my weaknesses, about the things I'm struggling with, either that ends up falling on my partner, which a lot of times it does for men, or I end up feeling really lonely, which I think we've all experienced at different times in our lives, where I don't know who to talk to. I was talking to a close friend actually recently who just shared with me that he was really struggling, but that his reaction to the struggling was, there's no one I want to call and there's no one I want to talk to. And so sometimes we have to make ourselves even more available for that. And maybe it's a good time to talk about what are the hurdles, especially for men, that block us from actually exposing those weaknesses or sharing or kind of going to that level of a deeper relationship. Like where are the blocks? Where are the hurdles?
I think one of the big hurdles is a very common thing that's brought up in men's issues, which is the first act of violence or hate that a man experiences is with their friends. I think there's a lot of uh, kind of constraining of relationships, or constraining of your masculinity at a very young age, because of the other boys around you trying to figure out and navigate the same thing. And so I think there's a lot of prosecution that comes with being a man, and that comes with having male relationships. If you step out of line, you can really seriously face some serious prosecution from your other guy friends. And I think that's a big hurdle in a lot of guys' lives, is feeling as though they cannot jump out of those constraints.
Yeah, I also feel like we're talking about blocks. It is almost like that voice that can come up in my head of, oh, they're going to see me a certain way and they're going to see me as weak. And then therefore, you don't want to be seen as weak. You want to be seen as strong, or how, you know, how that relationship is or how you think it is. And so you think weakness will be something that is a detriment to your relationship. When in fact, I think that kind of breaks through on a level, on like a surface level, and it allows you to actually go the deep there, and then it creates a space for that person to then share what they might be struggling with.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
Shame, guilt, all those different things kind of
Hmm.
become factors, I think.
Fletch, you remember being in when we were in Uganda? I think this is a moment that was coming up for me around this idea of where are the blocks. And there was a moment we were in Uganda when the people we were filming, the three guys, they were holding hands, and we came to realize that's actually common in Ugandan culture, that guys that are friends will hold hands walking down the street. And I remember someone held your hand, Fletch, and I remember that was a weird experience. It was weird for me. It was because that this idea of physical touch with our male friends, I think, is something that doesn't really get talked about, but it is a weird block. And I think a lot of it seems to me is rooted in maybe this like fear of homosexuality or our own sexuality, or not wanting to address that or acknowledge that, or growing up in a culture, I know I did, in which that was not okay, and that there was nothing worse than realizing you were gay, and having to confront that. I remember, I remember growing up, like that was the joke, right? Whether you were saying fag or gay or like that, that was just common phrase. And so I think one thing that's really holding back male relationships is fear of being viewed as gay. And as silly as it is to say, especially in the common culture in which there's so much more acceptance around different sexuality, I still feel like that's really apparent and prevalent.
Mm.
um, and when one of the key things that makes us feel close to someone is physical touch, you mentioned that, Fletch, that a love language for you is physical touch. It is for me as well. Like the willingness to hang in a hug longer than the bro tap, right? Like one of the ways I know I feel closest to you, Fletch, is we'll hang in a hug for 15 seconds. You'll fully go dead weight, and we get to like feel each other and connect in that way. But for some reason, that's a weird thing to talk about for guys.
Dude, I was giving this guy a hug yesterday. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. Dude, he gave me a walrus hug where like the arms stayed in, and I'm like, I can't. How do I go around this, dude? I didn't know what to do.
Oh, the guy hugs are so funny, man. It's kind of ridiculous, but I've really been implementing the one breath rule. Like at least you got to give me one breath.
Just to really feel their energy and be
Yes,
in
if you
that.
can't take one breath in the hug, you're not getting the benefits that Dr. Love talked about with the hugs, which is one of the guys we interviewed for Blue Marble Sky. He he really was big on the oxytocin that gets released when we
Mm.
hug. Right? It's the love hormone, right? And we it's okay. I believe it's okay, and in fact I believe it's essential that we're willing to be physical with our guy friends as well, like more so than just like a fist bump. Like, can you give your guy friend a hug and that not be weird? Like that to me starts to show depth in a relationship.
Yeah, I think about like why men get super uncomfortable with kind of those things, and I think a lot of it lies in proving their masculinity to their community. There's this great quote from this author named Robert Bly, and he wrote this like awesome book called Iron John. And in it, he has this quote that says, "Women can change the embryo to a boy, but only men can change the boy to a man." Like this sense of I need to prove my masculinity to other men around me more than anything else. And if I can do that, then I can actually feel like a man for the first time. Uh, if they respect me as a man, then I actually become a man. And that's, to me, the essence of why men's relationships suffer, because they suffer as as the result of kind of competing with one another rather than actually trying to connect with one another.
Yeah, I'm thinking about too, like, the art of, not really the art of, but just the idea of competition and how that continues to be, um, passed down through like sport and through a lot of ways in which boys are quote unquote developed into men. What are your views on like healthy competition?
There is 100% healthy competition. Healthy competition is exactly what you think it is, right? Like the ability to work as a team in a healthy way and uh, to accomplish a common goal, which is winning in a competition. Where competition gets unhealthy is in the covert, like this is proving my value if I win, and if I lose, my value kind of suffers as a result. Um, there's a ton of research on uh, young boys 16 to 26, and how they act around other boys. And when they feel as though their masculinity is at risk, they're more willing to do more risky behavior. They're more willing to binge drink. They're more willing to sneak out. They're more willing to commit crimes to prove their masculinity to their other guy friends. And so I think this is the real deficit is guys start rooting their relationships in almost proving their masculinity to one another rather than sitting there and trying to genuinely connect with one another.
Mm.
And I think that's a real problem. And actually, there was this interesting study that studied male relationships, and they concluded that men actually use women almost as a crutch to be that emotional outlet for them, just so that they can maintain their masculine image in front of other guy friends. So that's why you kind of have some of these guys who lean on their partner or lean on their girlfriends more for those emotional conversations, because they don't want to have those conversations with their male friends. It doesn't feel like a comfortable, safe space as it does with a masculine and feminine relationship. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and I guess it's a really interesting fight for a guy to break free from that and be able to say, okay, I need to get deeper with my guy friends. I need to go there.
Yeah. I want to stop on that point because then the question just becomes, okay, how? Like, what? Because if all of us want to go deep, we want to have these conversations. In fact, we have to have them. So we're either holding them in or we're having them with our romantic partner or however. It seems to me like like even just asking ourselves, myself, like, how am I creating the space for my friend to feel like it's okay to share his weaknesses? Like that question in itself, and even just acknowledging that with your male friends. Hey, I just want you to know, like, you can share anything you want with me. Like, unconditional love, like, I got you, man. Like, just the willingness um to say that, I think is really, it's really important. And anything else that you guys can think of, like a way just to start to create that space in your existing relationships, for someone to feel more comfortable.
I think a lot of it for me starts with not being so hungry to give advice in a conversation with a friend. Um, I think that's one of the ways we try to dominate and prove our masculine image is by being quick to give advice and to sound more knowledgeable than the person you're talking to. And so I think rather than doing that, just asking questions, not really giving them your opinions on the matter, and offering support rather than advice, I think is a really tricky thing to do. But if you can do it and do it well, you'll notice that relationship beginning to get deeper because they know that they can come to you and not feel as though they made a stupid decision, but rather they have someone there who's supporting them through a decision.
I think for me, I've realized that if I'm able to share something, a struggle or just like the real, raw, authentic thing that I'm going through, and I can just share it in a healthy way, then it kind of kickstarts this conversation that um, then they might feel like they can go and meet me there. Um, so it's kind of tough to ask a question right away. Let's say you're a guy and you really want to have deeper relationships and like how, right? Like how do I go there, right? You know, you have this vision for some of your relationships. Sometimes it starts with just you sharing. Sometimes it's just like, hey man, I've been, you know, kind of struggling with this, or I've been really struggling to you know, love myself. I've been really hard on myself. The internal voice has been like awful lately. And then it starts to create a room or an orbit that I think is safe. And then they can meet you there or not meet you there.
Yeah, I've heard it said that the two things that really bond a group are laughter and suffering. And so obviously there's a lot of value to laughing together, to getting on the golf course or in the climbing gym, whatever that thing is that brings you together. Like experiences and shared experiences are incredibly powerful. I know that was, I mean, for you and I, Fletch, for sure, the sparking of our relationship was just travel, our shared love for travel. Like that can open the door to depth. And then I feel like once we get there, then it's the willingness to, yeah, like you said, just continue to hold space for listening, but also um, the acknowledgement, right? So if it's the laughter, then the second piece is the suffering, and knowing that we all are suffering. So if there's only the laughter and I don't have the balance of the suffering, if I've never experienced the suffering of my friend, then I got to question how good a friend that is, because clearly that person doesn't feel safe to share with me. And have I shared my suffering with someone else? um, that's a pretty good indication of how close I feel with someone is, um, when I am suffering and I'm struggling, am I willing to share? And like you, I think you said that well, Mackenzie. I think a big piece of that is sometimes denying this, what feels like often a masculine urge to fix a problem. And I want to hone in on that for a little bit longer. Like, what is that? Because I know I struggle with it, and I've heard from a lot of my guy friends that it's it's struggling to just hold space and listen. There's a great children's book called The Rabbit Listened, right? It's just like, do I need to speak? Do I need to give advice? And I would just love to hear from you guys, just what you're finding on that. Any examples of times in your life where you've really struggled and someone's held space well for you?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, what is that, right? Like you asked that question. What is that? Why is it that that happens? Um, and the way I understand it through reading about this is it is literally someone giving you permission to prove your masculinity. And we're so desperate on the surface level to prove that in any opportunity we get, that if someone asks us a question or if someone's going through a problem, it is our permission to prove, it is our moment to prove that. And so I think that's where you have to do the deep work of realizing, first off, okay, like how much am I trying to push my manhood onto other people? That self-awareness is like a huge first step. And then the second step, especially going back to like how do you connect deeper with other guys, it takes a leap of faith, and it takes um, creating a dedicated intentional space. And that's a really uncomfortable conversation to have with a friend when you first do it. um, the I've got a problem, I want to sit down and I'd like your support, or I would love for you to listen, or help me out, whatever it is. Asking for help is one of the best first steps in actually growing that deeper connection with other guys. So an increase in self-awareness, but then also that willingness to be vulnerable and to be self-aware enough to say I need help, through talking through this situation. It's okay to not have an answer yet, and communicating is the best way to get that answer. I always say in my men's group, you can't. I came up with this too, and I was so proud of myself when I did, because it was like on the fly. I told a guy, you can't build a puzzle when it's in the box. You got to take the puzzle out of the box and start piecing it together. And that's what communication is for us. We can't formulate the full picture until we actually communicate with other people. We've got to take it out of the box.
What about you, Fletch? Any examples of times you feel like people have really held space well for you? Um,
I know yoga teacher training was an incredible space where I think there was just a gathering of humans who were there to support my growth and allow me to kind of shed a lot of different things in my past and things that didn't belong and things I wanted to move past. So I think that intentional group really allowed me to step into my power as a human and allowed me to step into um, just a more like joyful, lighter human being. And I think that's available for all of us when those relationships um, are real and those relationships and those spaces are held. But HD, you know what I was thinking about when you were talking was when we were in the mountains, and I believe we were working on um, like drafting up a new mission statement or vision statement for Blue Marble, and all of a sudden I just hit this point, and I'm like, dude, I can't work on this anymore. And this was like months after I had I was like going through my breakup, right? And it just like hit me like a wave, and I couldn't work on anything else. And you just sat there, and I just talked for the next hour, 2 hours. And I think that to me is what being a supportive friend looks like. And it's having that willingness to go there and be there for that friend and be there for that person when sometimes it's inconvenient or inconvenient, inconvenient, inconvenient.
Inconvenient.
Thank you.
Not to
um,
correct you and prove my masculinity, but yes, it's inconvenient.
but
yeah.
yeah, I mean that was an example that was coming up for me, HD, and just um, something that is like a way in which I feel like is like very healthy. On like a
Mhm.
sharing regard to like share what's on your heart and not bottle up the feeling and act like it doesn't matter or doesn't care, because then you're basically invalidating your own feelings. And then on
Mhm.
your end, being the listener. And note to the listener right now who's listening to this podcast, um, HD has a very very special gift in the art of listening. So if you can find a friend who is um, a great listener like him, then you got a friend for life.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate that. And I know you've done that for me countless times as well. And
Oh, shut it.
I feel like one thing I just connect if anyone is out there being like, yeah, it's not that easy to just like share these things. Like I really connect to you because I can. It's much easier for me to hold the space and listen to someone and just hold compassion for their suffering than it is for me to be like, hey, McKenzie, do you have 10 minutes? Like, I'm really struggling with something. Like, I'm really not good at creating that space for myself to the point in which I remember Fletch came in town recently and we just jumped right into work. We were doing work in some schools. And it reached the point I wasn't okay at that point. I was dealing with a lot. I was struggling and I needed to show strength in my head to Fletch to like show up to finish this work. Um, and it reached the point at which like it started to come out in other ways. We were fighting about stuff we normally wouldn't fight about to the point at which I basically broke down. And the truth is like it's gonna come out somehow, right? What we're talking about is healthy relationships, ways that we can actually nip it before it comes out in a way that you didn't anticipate or didn't expect. So
Mm.
creating space for yourself, I just want to acknowledge is incredibly difficult. And it's something that I know I got to work on because it is not only does it benefit me as the person sharing, but it benefits the relationship with the person who's listening as well. Because you open someone up to share in your suffering. And that is actually how the bond gets formed. And that's how you start to feel proximate and actually connected to someone. So it's hard, but it is so worth it.
Yeah. So, uh, HD, how would you go about being supportive? Like giving someone tools to be supportive, getting practical here. Um, let's say you want to be more of a closer friend to somebody else, and you're like, okay, I really want to grow a deeper relationship with this guy. How would I do that in a supportive way versus just trying to give them advice?
Yeah. There's two things that come up for me. One is it, the practice isn't being more self-focused, right? The practice is getting outside of myself. So one thing I've started to do in the mornings is I'll usually carve out 5 minutes, and for me, it's prayer. It doesn't have to necessarily be a prayer. It could just be an awareness of bringing the people that are closest to me into my mind and just thinking about them and basically sending them love. And as I'm doing that, I start to feel like I'm reconnecting with the things I know that are going on in their life, so I can be better about asking questions. Hey, Fletch, I know you said you had this big thing on Friday. How'd that go? Like, I want to be being better in that way by just actually thinking about your friends more. I think is a really good way to do that. And then the second is we got to be willing to ask the question, like, is there anything you're struggling with? Like, there are some questions that we can ask our friends that that signal, hey, this is your space to claim. Like, share with me, please. And so the willingness to be like, hey man, it's awesome that all these things are going well. Is there anything you're struggling with? Or are you feeling happy right now in your life? Is there any way I can show up and be more supportive for you? Questions, those three specifically have been really successful for me in terms of creating a space for someone who normally probably wouldn't share, to feel like, hey, this is a safe space for me. I'm going to step into it.
HG, can you talk a little bit too, a little about environment where you're asking those questions, and like where you found like success in your friends opening up in that way to you?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think uh, you know friendships, they start in groups, but they flourish one on one. And I think that's something that really needs to be prioritized in terms of depth in relationships.
Mm.
Is, am I getting one on one with these people? I know for me that's been the game changer. And maybe it can be three, like we have here. Uh, I think that can sometimes work depending on the dynamics. But the biggest thing I do, Fletch, and I know we do this all the time, and whether McKenzie knows it or not, I'm usually doing it when we're talking, is take a walk. And the person can be on the phone, but saying, hey, do you have time to take a walk? Like, that is, I mean, part of it is the movement piece, which I know we love. Like, your brain is working better. You're able to process more through these things. Um, that's something my dad taught me when I was super young. The way that I would get time with him and really connect was we'd go on a walk together. And that holds true to this day. And for me, the walk has become uh, kind of that signal to the people closest to me in my life, like, hey, I have something I want to talk to you about. I have something I want to share. Um, and so I don't know if there's anything for you guys, but the walk for me has been that environment, or that mentality of, hey, let's go deeper. Let's take this to the next level, because there's a time to laugh and there's a time to suffer.
Yeah, for me to be like a supportive person, the tools that we give when we do, like in men's groups, in terms of developing stronger communication, I always emphasize giving them the power. And what I mean by that is like giving them the power of choice and giving them the power to answer. And how do you do both of those things? You ask questions, right? Power of questions, power of consent, of permission for everything, right? Like, can I share a story? Or, um, uh, how can I help? Or how can I be supportive? That's a huge way I think someone can be supportive over giving advice, is simply by giving the person they're talking to the power of the conversation. I will also say that, um, another element of this would be to hold that more intentional space, like what you were saying, HD, with going on a walk. I think is a great way to do that. And so finding that intentional space, reaching out to your friends saying, hey, like, let's go on a walk, or even something where it's like you hear about an interview they're doing, or they went on a trip or something, calling them afterwards just to say, hey, I'm checking in. How was the trip, or how did that interview go, to prompt a more vulnerable conversation, and to show that you truly are listening to them, goes miles in growing a deeper connection with a friend. And so those are just some practical tools I give and also use to grow those deeper relationships.
I think, Mackenzie, you brought up such a great point, which is the idea of like giving them the power, because I think there are times to be a student, there are times to be a teacher, right? And there are times to listen, and there are times to share. And so if you want to be heard in your relationships, I think you really got to prioritize listening. And I can second the whole philosophy around the walk. That is something that I use time and time again. And breaking bread with with my friends, I think it's so important. Like food is a very spiritual act, and um, I think the idea of breaking bread with someone and sitting there and having a meal, it that is another idea of a shared experience. You get to talk about the food, and then it opens up to conversations about life.
Hmm. Especially if you're willing to ask the intentional conversation to the table. That's what, like, I'm always amazed. People want to go deep. Like, it's the second the question gets asked, they want to go there. Like, people are willing to be open.
Mm.
Can you, listener, Fletch, McKenzie, myself, can we be the one that's willing to ask the question? Like, that takes just a little bit of courage, but it's so worth it, and it really
So,
does.
what would be okay? You're sitting around a table, and you're at a dinner party. What would be that question that you would prompt someone to go deeper with?
Hey guys, what's the thing you hate most about me?
Yeah, I'd probably keep that one out. What about what's one thing in your life that you're looking forward to? What is something you're thinking about more than you wish you would? I think those are two that come to mind. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. The rosebud thorn, like high and low from the day. It can be as simple as that. But you just starting to invite people into a space that says, "Hey, we care what you have to say."
Yeah, going back to your point, HD, on like people want to share, people want to go deep. Um, Men grow up constrained. Here's the parameters of how to live life. You can't bounce between the walls. You got to stay straight. And I think in turn that's made a lot of men crave permission to do things like that, like get deep, share their feelings, share what's going on in their head, because they haven't been given that space growing up at all. There was that study done where it brought girls and boys out of school, and if there was an issue at school, the parents would ask the girls, how'd you feel about that, or like what's going through your mind, and then they'd ask the boys, what did you do about it? Right? So for men, it's all been about action, right? I've got to like always have the solution. I've always got to find the solution. But in turn, we've sacrificed that ability to share. So if you can give your community permission, especially with men, it can go a long way in their own development. And it's one of the best ways you can help a friend.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, guys, Fletch, you started this conversation. I said it's good to see you guys, and you said it feels good to be seen. And I think that to me is kind of, if we just boil it down, am I really seeing my friends? Am I taking the time to make sure I even know their story? I know that's something that makes me feel seen. And that's a question I hope you guys will reflect on. And I want to ask y'all and finish with a little bit of vulnerability here. Like, how can I, and maybe we can each go around, like, how can I do a better job seeing you guys? Is there anything that you guys would share for the other two on what it would look like to feel a little bit more seen by the others?
I think continuing to check in. I do a lot of freelance work um, to provide for me and my cat, and so I do feel like checking in on like my energy. I think that's the best way I can put it, because like creative energy is a force that I am learning how to channel and what projects to I want to put it in. Um, so just saying, checking in and being like, hey, Fletch, where are you putting your creative energy? And seeing if that's in alignment with where I want to be going in my life.
I just want to shout you out too, Fletch. You just did 31 days of creating a video every day, which for those of you that don't create a video, that is not an easy thing to do. So well deserving of celebration.
Golf clap.
Some awesome videos also, like just some good work. Calbs, anything come up for you?
Yeah, very close to Fletch's. I always try to make sure I make an effort to just call my friends when I think about them. And there's something about when a friend calls me out of the blue just to check in, see what's new with life, that just in like it just sparks this light inside of me of like, oh my gosh, there's people out there who are thinking of me, right? So I think those check-in calls whenever you're thinking of someone can go so far.
Yeah, that one for me too.
Yeah, that one's good. I'm like mic drop on
It's
that.
so good.
Oh my
Also,
gosh.
it for me, I'm even thinking like it doesn't always have to be a call. It can just be like a voice memo. Like, hey man, I'm thinking of you. Want to do just let you know and hear how things are going. But yeah, that's a great one, Calbs. Dang.
Yeah, I think you're right. Even like when someone sends you a podcast or something. In here. And like that really becomes the key point and the key take home, because I also feel that too on just, hey, like being able to create. Once again, I've told you guys I'm not very good at sharing. Like I don't create the space for me to share my suffering or like what I'm struggling with. Um, but yeah, just like genuinely checking in on like, hey, is there anything you're struggling with? Because like I said, I'm not very good at creating the space to get vulnerable or in that way. It's the willingness to share, but not always the willingness to create the space for myself. So maybe just the awareness of that.
Well, HD, Fletch and I, been deliberating on how we can support you, and we both agreed that we will split the payment in giving you a good buzz cut. I think it's
Sponsored by
Fletch,
BB and Barnes.
yeah.
Fletch.
Now that we're in the winter, I think it's a perfect time to shave that head.
You guys see these curls coming out the back?
You
Honestly,
might
though,
not be able to see them.
the cold weather has made my hair so straight. So if I took it out of this bun right now, it literally is just horrible. So I may have to take you up on that order.
Buzz cut.
BB and Barnes. Speaking of
Consulting.
boys, good sesh. Thanks as always. Love y'all.